Turn now to a documentary with the power to change lives.
Sweet beans, gelatos, and perk 30s, and 80s, and crack, and cocaine.
And there were people who were worried that you don't want those kids in your waiting room. They don't look different, walk different, talk different. They're just like the others who are our children. It's just that the nature of their disease is difficult and more challenging.
If you've ever had a drug addiction or know someone who has, you know the toll it takes not only on the addict, but on their family and friends as well. And it doesn't matter who you are or where you are from, addiction can hit anyone. The Hungry Heart looks at the problem through the eyes of a 72-year-old pediatrician and his patients in an unlikely place, the state of Vermont. Since 2000, the number of people seeking treatment for opiate addiction in the state has increased by a staggering 770%. The problem is so bad that Governor Pete Shumlin recently devoted his entire State of the State speech to the opiate epidemic there. He also led the State House in applauding filmmaker Bess O'Brien and the doctors she highlights for their efforts to address it. And joining us now is the director, Bess O'Brien, director of The Hungry Heart, and Raina Lowell, a mother of two and a subject in the film who has been sober now for 3 years after a struggle with pills and heroin. Thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
And Raina, I want to start with you. Your situation spiraled very quickly. I want to play a little bit of that from the documentary.
I was 30 years old before I became an opiate addict. That first time I took those Vicodin, it was felt like a gift from God. Everything fell apart fairly quickly. I couldn't handle any more stress. I closed my business and my marriage fell apart.
So when did you know that you had a problem, and how bad did it actually get before you sought help?
Well, I think I knew I had a problem before I was even really ready to admit it to myself. But I used painkillers for a few years before I finally came out of the closet, so to speak. And I told my mother that I had a problem with painkillers, that I'd become addicted to painkillers. And that was the first time that I sought treatment.
Well, and Bess, talk to us about stories that are very similar to her. Did you find a similarity, a commonality in all of them?
Well, I mean, I think prescription drug addiction is everywhere. It's not just a Vermont thing. I think the fact that our governor stood up and said, you know, we have a problem, has sort of opened the door for the rest of the country to stand up and admit that you know, in our society we have a lot of prescription drug addiction. So in the film, I really explore this issue with all kinds of different people, different ages, different socioeconomic levels, and so I think that it hits everybody, and it's a human story. One of the best things that the governor said in his State of the State was that he really felt that we needed to move this issue off of this is a criminal problem to this is a health issue, and I think that that is a very important distinction to make.
Raina, I want to talk to you a little bit about addiction. It becomes this sort of voice in your head that fights to stay alive, and it really doesn't function any different inside the addict, whether it's prescription drugs or illegal drugs, and just talk about how that functioned inside of you and how you finally were able to break free.
Sure. Well, and I just want to clarify that the first time I sought treatment, I was a prescription pill addict. But by the time I finally managed to get sober this last time, I was an IV heroin user and a crack addict. So that's where my addiction led me. And, you know, certainly never in a million years would I have pictured myself going down that road. But addiction is incredibly powerful. And sometimes I describe it as having split personality, because you know, it is this sort of other part of me that would take over and make choices that I really didn't want to be making. And addiction is so incredibly powerful that it's far beyond anything that I can control when I'm in it.
Raina, I think it takes a lot of courage to speak about your own addiction. It's an amazing film. And Bess, you also highlight a local doctor, Dr. Fred Holmes, who's been doing some incredible work. What was it about Dr. Holmes that touched you?
Well, Fred actually called me because he had been working with young people in his practice around prescription drug addiction and recovery. And I think he got to a place where he felt like a lot of people were judging these young people and feeling like they were those kids. And so he was essentially talking to a mutual friend of ours, and they said, oh, you should talk to Bess O'Brien because she makes these movies in Vermont that sort of reveal the invisible and bring things to light and tell sort of the intimate stories around very difficult subjects. And so Fred called me and said, I'm this pediatrician, I live in St. Albans, would you be interested in making a movie focusing on my patients and the work that I do? And so I went up and met Fred, and he's just a wonderful human being, so generous of spirit, and then met a lot of his patients, and then really focused on his way of working. But then I also wanted to include people like Raina, who were a little older, because as we know, addiction hits anyone at any age, so I also wanted to include that.
Well, Raina, you are so incredibly brave, and Bess, the documentary is so moving. Thank you both very much for being with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
And we will be right back with some